Hello and welcome to episode number 213 of the ETPHD Team podcast with myself and Ros. Hi Ros, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
Great. And Anna, how are you?
I am really good. The sun is out and just makes everything better. How are you?
I'm also great, thanks. I'm also loving the sun. How many memes have you seen that are like, oh, when you think your life is falling apart and then the sun comes out and you're like, oh, everything's great again. It just is like
seasonal depression.
instantaneous how much of an effect it can have on your mood, right?
So good. And I was so proud of myself. I got up a little bit earlier than usual, went to very early yoga, and I think it's just set myself up for the day. I'm feeling very good.
Well done you. Congrats.
Interestingly, there was only me and one other girl. It was very man heavy, this class, and I found it really interesting to notice that I don't think I compare when I'm in a yoga class, because I'm very like, I've caught myself out on that before and focus on me, but I was like, I'm really not even looking around. I'm not even focused on anyone other than the initial like, oh, the pod's full of guys, that's okay. But yeah, interesting to know.
I've definitely noticed, was it on the podcast I was talking about the other day about how there are more, I seem to feel like there are a lot more men in classes, or was I saying this to my friend? Actually my guy friend who I was trying to get to go to yoga because he struggles with ADHD, and I was like, yoga's really helpful. But I've definitely noticed a shift in the number of men not relative to women, but relative to 2 years ago in a yoga class compared to women. I think it's amazing to see more men there.
At the yoga studio where I taught at, I finished up last week, I actually find the men to be really regular with their practice, as in like they would come they're very dedicated, so you'd see them at the same class, the same like weekly class as well. And yeah, there's quite a few actually. One time a man did come in jeans and I was checking him in, it was his first time, and I was like, it's like, sorry, like we don't have a changing facility, but we've got a toilet. But he actually had his shorts underneath his jeans and he just wiped them off in the studio, and I was like, interesting. I was like, you can't do yoga in jeans.
Yeah, that sounds unbelievably painful. Like just even trying to do a down dog when you've got jeans on.
Just so because it was his first time, and I was like, how much do you know about yoga?
Yeah.
But he was just really really well prepared, so he was.
I like that. I went to a class the other night and it was 75 minutes hot, which is a lot anyway, but it wasn't Ashtanga, it was called rocket yoga, and the description was it's based on Ashtanga, but it's more accessible to everyone, and there's more flow to it. Because obviously with Ashtanga, which I like to try and do Ashtanga now and again to try and like push me in my poses. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll give this one a try. Holy moly, I knew, like, it was so tough. There was one point, there were 2 new people in the class and we just happened to be next to each other, and so we had to put our hand up at the beginning, and there was a bit where you go from bow pose, where if you don't know bow pose, you're like lying on your front and you're like holding your ankles, basically arms are kind of behind you, not boat. And she said, you're in bow pose, and she said, okay, you're going to roll onto your side. You need to get some momentum and then roll onto your side. And so I rolled onto my side and just kind of rolled over like some sort of like dead bug. And then the new girl next to me was just laughing away at me. And I was like, this is one I can't do it. And then she did the same on other things. And I thought, it's so funny in yoga because everyone is so just like, you're in your own zone until you're not. And it's such a kind place that if you ball something up, everyone is just like, oh, mate, been there, my friend. But it was so hard. And I came out of it thinking, in the past, I would have loved that type of yoga, right? Oh, my trousers just fell into my coffee. What a sad sorry. In the past, I would have thought, oh, well, that's a great yoga, I'll do that yoga again. Whereas this time I'm like, that's not what I want yoga for. I don't want yoga to feel like a big, massive workout. I want it to be like calming and centering and mindful. And that was just like, thought I was going to die all the way through.
Because rocket is, I've never did rocket because no one offers it around where I'm from, but I'm sure, because there's a girl from my studio who wants to do rocket teacher training, and the owner of my studio said that is like the hardest type of yoga, and she actually said she would maybe struggle to get people, I'm in North Wales, to like, it's so like niche, because I think it goes like Ashtanga, rocket, so I think it's like extreme. But really fun fact that I learned my teacher training, Ashtanga yoga came from when India was at war. They got 12 and 13-year-old boys. They did the Ashtanga poses as like a way of like combat military. So like, if you struggle to get into any of the poses in Ashtanga, that's because we don't have the body of a 13-year-old boy.
Oh, thank goodness.
This gives me so much, like, I needed to hear this, so I did, because I think like it's so extreme. Like it's not always inclusive for like, if someone's like new to yoga practice, I wouldn't say go to like Ashtanga. And I was like, it's also so crazy how then in the West we've took these practices in like a different direction, so we have from like where they like originally came from.
Interesting. That's a great fact. And again, like you said, very reassuring. I'm happy with that, because some of them are like, you've got to twist your arms around one way, your body around the other, tucked under your leg and backwards, and you're like, I think if I did that, my shoulder would fall out. Like I always like, I used to. I remember when I was at a yoga class in Dubai, and she said, we're doing a lot of shoulder opening, and the teacher said to me, you know, you've got a lot of muscle in your shoulder area, so you will find these ones more tricky and stuff. And I'm gonna dine on that forever. Like, I just can't do them because I'm just too hench. And then now I do it, and I'm like, I'm not sure I've still got that excuse, but I'm like, it's just because I've got a bodybuilder's body. I don't anymore. But we cling to it. Anyway, let's get cracking. Anna, do you want to go first today?
Yes, very exciting one. What is your advice for someone starting their fat loss journey after 9 months of working on relationship with food and herself?
I would start with, keep up all of the things that you've already been doing. There are some things that you won't be able to do. Examples: honouring your hunger and fullness. That will become trickier with dieting, because you will be hungry sometimes, that you can't always honour it. You won't always be fully satisfied after a meal, and you won't often be eating to complete fullness. Those things aside, it's tempting to kind of let the other things slip sometimes, but actually mindfulness in your diet becomes even more important, and compassion and flexibility become even more important. And you know, I always say, in order to sustain successful fat loss, you need to prep yourself for the end of a diet at the beginning of a diet, if not 9 months before, which you've done. So every time you're doing these things, even if you feel like at a time that's not maybe the most important thing, know that it's supporting you not only in your general overall well-being and health, but also it's supporting you to maintain that fat loss when you're finished.
Yeah, and I'd also add, I don't know if this person's tried fat loss before or like a diet, but reminded yourself this is going to be a new fat loss journey. So it's going to be different from any previous attempts at like deficits and things like that before. So you're probably going to be more curious, and you're maybe going to have more questions and maybe more like self-doubt. And that's where compassion comes into it, and just being really kind and patient. I think it's like, well, what I see with my clients is patience is like one of the biggest factors when you're going to fat loss after your relationship with food. It's going to take time. And just like you've been on a 9-month journey, healing your relationship with food, that might be, you know, you're going to be another couple of months down the line, that fat loss journey as well.
You've hit such a good point. I think sometimes, like when we are dieting and we've had bad experiences of dieting in the past, we develop all these limiting beliefs around, well, every time I've dieted before, I regain the weight, or I failed, or it hasn't worked for me, or I've picked up disordered eating habits, or I've fallen into binge eating. And it can cause us to be fearful around dieting, and we can be reserved about the dieting process. And sometimes we can, whether you want to call it self-sabotage or self-preservation or self-protection, whatever you want to call it, sometimes we can fall into, or find ourselves drawn to falling into old habits, because it's like, well, why bother? I failed 100 times. I've dieted before. You haven't failed, the diet's failed you. But regardless, you have this narrative of, I failed dieting 100 times before, I may as well just not even try. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead, and I'll start it, and then I'll just like bring myself back to, like, I just won't dedicate myself wholly, because if I dedicate myself wholly and I feel like I failed, that hurts a lot more than if I just kind of, oh, I don't really want it, or you self-handicap in some way. There's cool research around self-handicapping, and how if we, like, often, and women tend to be more prone to this than men, we almost justify why we're going to fail before we even do something. So example, like you go into an exam and you're like, oh, well, I didn't really like, I'm just, you purposely don't study that much. And I know that's probably not a lot of people listen to this podcast. You're probably A-types who do study a lot, but you purposely don't study as much so that when you fail or you don't do as well as you could, you say, oh, well, it's because I just didn't study that much, rather than internalize that thing of like, well, I failed. So just be mindful of the stories that you tell yourself around that. Okay, Ross, question.
So this is from Becca's client. So what is meant by the term, I don't know if I can pronounce this word, so societally accepted body. Generally, our society is becoming familiar with larger bodies because of our food choices and lifestyle compared to in the past. So what is now an accepted body may have previously been viewed as overweight. I'm aware of our cultural internalized weight bias, but does this not serve a purpose in keeping our society healthier rather than exacerbating the obesity pandemic, which our society is currently facing and which is bound to worsen in the future?
What a great question.
Yeah, I feel like this could be like a question on like a final dietitian's exam.
Yeah. Evidence-based answer, 4 sides,
Yeah.
4 front and back.
Such a good question.
Does anyone want to jump in on it first?
Well, something that comes to mind, I completely understand actually where this question comes from, because I used to be a pediatric dietitian. So I did. And whenever kids would come in, we don't do BMI for kids. They've got growth charts. So you measure their weight and height and plot them against the WHO standards, which is like all the countries in the world, not all the countries, but some of the countries. And parents would come in and they'd be like, I'm really worried about wee Sophie because she's smaller than everyone else in her class. And then I would like measure her weight and height. And actually she would be plotting on the 50th centile, which means she was average for her age category, which would pose the question, the mum would be like, but she's smaller than the rest of the kids in her class. And I often had this question with my colleagues, does that mean the rest of her kids in her class are bigger? And then she, like, I don't know the rest of her kids, and then she looks underweight, but actually she's average according to our growth charts. But these growth charts, you know, they need to be repopulated every couple of years and they're probably lagging behind. So I don't think that answers the question, but I think I'd be in agreement that we're seeing this across all ages. So we are.
Interesting perspective for sure. I think so there's probably 2 parts to this question, right? You know what I'm going to say when you say like, what's the term, what do we mean by societally accepted body? We mean a body, when we talk about that, we mean a body that in general is not subject to weight bias and weight stigma, which tends to be a smaller body. And even though we are becoming far more accepting of bodies, health at every size, and bodies of different sizes, there is still an inherent weight bias, and we do still see inherent weight stigma across the board. So it's amazing that we're talking about it more, but if we went into maybe a doctor's surgery, I'm not picking out doctors specifically here, but if we went into, say, a doctor's surgery now and looked at the way patients were treated on average, again, not all doctors, but looked at the way patients were treated on average, they would still more than likely experience some sort of weight stigma when it came to people in larger bodies trying to get health care, for example. But of course, on social media, we're seeing a little bit more variety. And you know, I went on the Daily Mail sidebar of shame the other day. Sometimes I go on just to kind of see what the narrative is around things. I'm always intrigued. And there's still lots of comment on women's bodies, but it does look to me like it has shifted away from, there's still all like, oh, Rita Ora shows her like washboard abs, but then there'll be somebody in a larger body that they're like, I mean, they'll be talking about her boobs or whatever, still discussing like male gaze stuff, but even Daily Mail sidebar of shame is starting to get a little bit better at humanizing and celebrating all sizes, right? So we're definitely making a shift towards that. But that's not why we have a societally accepted body. It's not to keep people healthy. Shaming people, which is what we're talking about here in terms of weight stigma, shaming people does not keep them healthy. Weight stigma is associated with poorer longevity, poorer health outcomes, more disordered eating, higher body weight, more stress, more cardiovascular, greater risk of cardiovascular disease, reduced chance of going to cancer appointments, and the potential implications of all of that stuff, right? So having a societally accepted norm is not anything that is going to help keep our society healthier. That's not how we keep people healthy. We keep people healthy by, you know, not shaming people. So actually, yes, I think this is a common narrative, especially in fitness, of like, well, like when those Nike models came out, you know, the mannequins that came out and they were in larger bodies, and people were saying we're glorifying obesity. No, we're saying that anybody deserves to exercise and feel comfortable when they do that. And by doing that, people are more likely to exercise and feel more comfortable in themselves and feel more comfortable in their bodies, and therefore more likely to treat their bodies well. If it's on the other hand, we only have, you know, small normalized bodies that stigmatize people in larger bodies, or potentially relatively smaller bodies, you know, like outside of that quote unquote norm, these people are not going to be incentivized to take care of themselves. They're going to feel stigmatized, and stigma never is supportive of healthful behavior change ever. So I think sometimes it's about holding space for like all of these things from true. Yes, excess body fat is detrimental to health, but so is weight stigma, and acceptance of these things doesn't improve health. Acceptance of these things doesn't make health outcomes worsen health outcomes, but actually is more likely to improve health outcomes for the society. Okay. Any good podcast recommendations, apart from ETPHD, obviously, please? I love something new to listen to.
Oh, can I let's do a plug for my podcast. Myself and Becca started a new podcast called, I'm very proud of this name, A Therapist and a Dietitian Walk Into a Bar. So I suppose it's like what would you call it? What do you call it when a series has like a runoff series? So it's like the runoff series from ETPHD.
Oh, it's a spin-off. Spin-off.
It's a spin-off. It's a spin-off show. Me and Becca, and yeah, we just like delve into topics in a bit from her therapeutic experience and then a dietetic experience. So that's just a little self-plug.
Highly recommend. Great pod. I was just saying before we came on, actually, I sent it to someone this morning about another topic.
Thank you.
I've not been listening to anything new, I have to say. Oh no. Abby Clancy, we talked about it last week, didn't we?
Therapy Crouch.
Yeah, but other than that, I'm still sticking to the usual at the moment, I'm afraid. My therapist goes to...
We didn't talk about my drama last week, did we? Because of the timing. So Anna got a voice note on Thursday night, so it was before Level Up. I had drama last week, guys. I was on Diary of a CEO. Good time.
And then, well, I thought it was weird because obviously before your email went out, Roslyn shared another clip from it. I was like, oh no.
I was like, so I heard it because a girl who does yoga posted she actually is like speaking over the sound clip, because you know, like that podcast always does really, what's the word? I forgot the word today, sorry guys. But they basically edit the show, don't they, to get more people in. And I was listening, and then your email went, I don't know which I got first, but I was like, oh my goodness, I've heard this story before, so I have.
Interesting. So, oh gosh.
Did you listen to it all, Emilia?
I listened to a lot of it. So it was a podcast episode with a man who I know. I suppose this is my chance to say my side of it without making drama, right? It was a podcast with somebody that I know, right? And he talks a lot about dating and has guests on his own podcast, like Jordan Peterson, and I think he's been on Joe Rogan, this guy. So he talks about dating and male-female dynamics, gender dynamics, etc. And years and years ago, I used to listen to his podcast. I don't anymore because I find a lot of the guests that he has on quite problematic, and I find some of the conversations quite problematic. And again, this is just like my opinion on the opinions sometimes that are expressed on that podcast. So I don't love it. I love the opinions on that podcast. Anyway, then I got a message from our friend Lewis on Thursday night, just before Level Up. And he said, I didn't know whether to send you this just before Level Up, because I know you've got a lot on, but I feel like this is you. Oh gosh, what is it? So it was a clip from the Diary of a CEO. And the guest was saying, you know, it was this, like, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but a lot of this is verbatim too. I've got a friend who has a PhD, apparently a self-made millionaire. I'd love to hear about that or see some of that. Has a PhD, self-made millionaire, big name in the fitness industry. She struggled so much to find a partner that she has gone down the sperm donor route. And he was very political, and what he said, you know, with all of her resources, I'm sure she will give this child a fantastic life. But make no mistake, that is still bringing a child into this world in a single parent household. And single parent households have negative outcomes for predominantly boys, but for children in like that environment, for anyone to say that is the optimal way of doing things would be foolish, something along those lines, right? And I just thought, at no point have I ever said that's optimal. But I hate this cherry picking of research of, well, single parent household. It's like, okay, well, have you compared that to households where, you know, parents don't get on, or there's issues in that nuclear family where parents are unhappy? Or have you compared it to someone who chooses to be a single mother versus someone who isn't, or to single dads, or to any of these things? No. What you've done is you've taken single parent household research and used it to peddle your narrative that you have a clear, strong narrative that ideally we should be have a nuclear family. And he used it to as the narrative of saying, I'm not saying women should be domestic prostitutes, but what I am saying basically is women need to think about their choices earlier in life, is basically what he was saying. And for me, I thought, does this annoy me? Like, how annoyed am I about this? It didn't name me. Nobody really knew it was me apart from everyone who knows me. And I've spoken about this before. But I thought, how dare you have the audacity to use my story to peddle your narrative? And the reason that I worked on it, I journaled on it, and I was like, why is this getting under my skin? And I realized it was because all of the areas that I felt insecure about when I was going through that single mother by choice part of my journey, which may or may not be finished yet. I'm in a different phase of that right now. But when I started that, all of my fears around bringing in a child into this world without a clear male father figure, accepting that I couldn't find a partner that I wanted to do this with, all of these things where I had to come to a place of peace with, and I finally did do that. It didn't take a lot of work. I know myself enough, but I definitely had shame around them. For a man then to go onto a podcast and say, and basically pick these things out where I felt shame. She couldn't find a man, she's bringing a child into the world without a dad, was because she made the wrong choices and focused too much on her career and this stuff. I was like, that's why it bothers me, because you've taken my shame and used it to peddle what I feel is quite a sexist narrative. As much as I actually don't totally disagree with the fact of, like, do I think it's optimal? Not really. But do I think it's part of it can be optimal for a certain situation? Yes. And do I think it's a good thing to do for some people? Yes. And then I was annoyed, but I didn't really do anything with it. I wrote to my subscribers about it, obviously. And then I had Level Up and I forgot about it. And I spoke to some of my friends about it, and I was like, gosh. And then I got over it really quickly, because what's the point in, I don't care. His opinion means nothing to me. I don't value it in any way. But I was annoyed. But I did get onto Diary of a CEO. Just wasn't me or my own voice. So it was almost a celebratory time. Almost.
All the listeners of ETPHD should message Diary of a CEO, because he always says who do you want on to, who do you want a guest? So guys, we should all message Emilia Thompson and be like, so
Come at me.
like, she's actually been on the podcast before, you just didn't realise.
Yeah. She is the example, the shining example of a woman who's chosen the wrong pathway in life. Oh, yeah. Sorry, that was a side chat, but I feel like this is our space to talk about it, because I hadn't yet. Podcasts I listen to, I'm into How to Fail with Elizabeth Day at the moment. I do really like that podcast.
That's my favorite, one of my favorite podcasts.
Interesting. It's great, isn't it? She's got such a diverse, what's the word I'm looking for? Such diverse guests and opinions, and just great.
Yeah, that's why I love it, because she literally gets like people from me in Chelsea on one week, and then the next week she got like the guy that ran for Prime Minister, and I'm like, this is amazing. So it is.
She had Craig David, Bernie Sanders, and Lorraine Kelly. Like, come on now.
Yeah, the fact she can pull that off like that, that diversity of guests.
Yeah,
I'm the same as you, Anna. I just listen to my therapist ghost at me. And I want to listen to Huberman sometimes, because like a girl I do yoga with always like quotes it. My supervisor kind of always chats about it, but I've heard that his podcasts are like 2-3 hours long, and the research is questionable, and I just don't have the capacity for that at the minute.
Yeah, I refuse. And we'd be like, oh, this guest in Joe Rogan, I'm like, 4 hours. And that's a book. Like, I'm not doing it. I did listen to 4 hours of Miley Cyrus on Joe Rogan, I'm not gonna lie, but other than that, no.
I used to listen to Joe Rogan when I was milking cows, because my milk cows I had to milk cows for like 4 months the first time I went to Australia to get my visa, and we had 680 cows to milk, which took like 3 hours, and you couldn't go back and forth to the speaker. So I figured out Joe Rogan podcasts were like 3 to 4 hours long, so you could do a whole podcast.
Oh my god.
But you'd have to also just like suffer sometimes as well.
The thing is if you're not milking cows but you like a long podcast, the thing with Huberman is that he's a neuroscientist. He's obviously very intellectual, right? The problem that I have is that I have a PhD. I'm not sure if you know, but if I went onto a podcast and then started talking about physics or geography, right, you'd be like, what? And we're like, well, she's got a PhD, she's a doctor, she can read science, and so of course she can talk about for 4 hours about geographical plates, and I don't even know what they are, because there's this authority bias, right, of like someone is a medical doctor or they have a degree, right? He is very good, I am sure, at neuroscience, I'm sure, right, as sure as one can be, but he says very, very dubious things when it comes to nutrition, for example. So not drinking caffeine for 90 minutes when you wake up, there's no scientific reason, like no scientific evidence to say that that's helpful, none. Maybe there's some mechanistic data that he's got that he says, but that doesn't mean anything. And if you look at health outcomes from people who had caffeine in the morning versus caffeine 90 minutes later, I don't even think the research exists. It's just not there, right? So it's tough, because you definitely see people now taking Huberman's stuff and they're like, oh, I'm going to wait 90 minutes before I have my coffee, and whilst I'm doing that I'm going to stare in the sun and burn my retina and get my early morning sunlight and then go in my ice bath, and that will reduce my inflammation, all of these things. And it's like, maybe some of these things will work, but I think his podcast serves a purpose for sure, but I think he's kind of seems to be going the way of like the ego a little bit, of like you gain traction by talking about all this stuff, and realistically, as we know, there's only so much stuff you can say about one topic. We often talk about binge eating all the time, and we always frame it in a different way, but it always comes back to a lot of the same fundamental stuff, and I'm sure the same. Well, neuroscience is obviously probably far more diverse than that. But eventually you run out of stuff to say, so you have to talk about something else. And so I'm a bit, and when you don't know, right, I don't know how to read research on physics, for example. So if someone said to me, this is a really robust study, I could look at the statistical analysis, I could look at like the group numbers, I could look at the basic stuff. But if they said, oh, they used this technique to measure this, I'd be like, okay, I don't know if that's valid. And I could do that with nutrition, and I question the ability to do that for like in different realms. But and I've listened to some of his episodes way in the past, and they were quite good. I think that's all I've got on podcasts. So in a nutshell, none of us have got anything wild in terms of good podcasts. What I do sometimes like to do is just go on like the Apple charts and see what's there. But often you find a lot of them are the same. Like they have the same guests on, like Gabor Mate is on like every single podcast in like the top 10 at the moment. Like you do find people often are on the same ones. I do like Adam Grant's podcasts actually. And I do sometimes, if I run out of podcasts, listen to like the TED podcasts. And then if there's somebody that I like speaking to, then I'll search for them and see what podcast they're on. And you can sometimes get like some nice podcasts that way.
Are there ways to use nutrition to promote sleep? For example, my friend saves her carbs and carbs loads at nighttime because she says it makes her sleep better.
I think the research around this is quite, well, I know the research around this is quite, what's the word? Unequivocal or equivocal? Equivocal, i.e. not all the same. Carbs can help. The reason people say carbs can help sleep is because of like the neurotransmitter release, supporting sleep quality or sleep onset. But again, the research is kind of not definitive in that. I think the reason that can be helpful is, especially if you're dieting, is that you're not going to bed hungry, that carbs are more often than not warm and comforting, and that can be quite soporific. So like if you're having oats or something like that, then that can help ease sleep. And if you've been hungry all day and you finally feel satiated, that can help with sleep. There's some research around having protein around near bedtime to help with sleep too. But that's really it. The main thing with nutrition and sleep is not going to bed overly full. Do any of you track your sleep?
No.
No, I don't need something to tell me my sleep is bad.
Shaming you every morning.
I was tempted for a while to get a Aura ring. So I was. But then I was just kind of, and like they're quite big in the yoga community at the minute. But then I was like, why do I need something to like tell me how I'm sleeping? Because I remember I had a Fitbit years ago, and I don't know how, I don't think they're that accurate. They track your sleep. And I kind of like obsessed over it a wee bit. I was like, oh, I must try and get 8 hours tonight. And then I was like, I'm okay. So I am.
Yeah,
but
you can become a bit of a slave to the data. And sometimes people are like, wake up and they feel like they slept well. And then they look at their tracker and it's like, you slept bad. And you're like, oh, must have slept bad day for me. I use an app called Sleep Cycle, and the reason I use it is because I like the alarm, and you can set it for a range. So when you're at your lightest level of sleep over 15 minutes, it starts to wake you up with a nice gentle alarm. So I really like that. But that does track your sleep, but it's not, I don't think it's super accurate. It's just on the side of your bed, you're not wearing anything. But it's interesting whenever I've had pizza, and because I always eat past fullness with pizza, and I do it mindfully. I don't feel bad about it. I love pizza, so I always eat past fullness. But whenever I eat past fullness, my sleep is always lower quality, and it takes me longer to get to sleep every single time. And I'm like, gosh, it's just that the digestion and metabolism of that is, and the discomfort that comes with fullness, even if it's not over fullness, can impact sleep quality. So that for sure impacts sleep, just like hunger does. In general, if you struggle with sleep, I would recommend eating like an hour before bed, a mix of carbohydrates and protein, something that's comforting and to a point of comfortable fullness, but not discomfort. What's the question?
this is one of my clients' question. When someone asks how they can help with binge eating, what can I tell them? E.g., a loved one. So I think this client was wondering when her friends ask how can they help her with her binge eating, what can she tell them? I'd help her. Which I said was maybe, I think this could be really difficult for some people. I think as well, like eating disorders can be a bit of like, people are worried, they don't want to say the wrong thing, so they say nothing. But one thing that I got taught whenever I first started training eating disorders was You can never say anything wrong to someone who's an eating disorder. Even if you do say something that you think is going to be perceived as wrong, you're just going to build resilience in that person. So if it was something maybe you said that might be a trigger to, obviously you don't want to intentionally trigger someone, but we're all learning. So we're all like learning about our language. So it's better, maybe it's just getting confidence for those friends of how to talk about it. But what I said to this client was maybe tell the friends to listen to this podcast, because we talk about such a diverse range of things to do with body image and restricting and binge eating, that might give them confidence in like our answers about how to talk about these types of things.
Great advice. Great advice. Get on the pod.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think holding space, asking them if they've got the capacity to hold space, and obviously if they do listen to the podcast, then they might be more mindful, but being open to having that conversation around boundaries and what's helpful to talk about, what's not helpful to talk about.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, in terms of the best thing you can do is not comment on someone's food choices, not comment on their bodies, not comment on their food choices, try not to create stress around meal times. If you know, maybe you're going out for pizza and your friend might say something like, oh, so nice to know that you feel comfortable eating pizza. And actually that person right now could be sat there feeling really anxious and like really like they're overcoming something and trying to not feel guilty. And then you've brought attention to it. And it's so well intentioned of, you know, I'm so proud of you, you're doing so well. But actually what you're doing is bringing attention to the whole thing. And so it's this balance, isn't it, of not ignoring it and holding space, like you were saying, Anna, but then on the other side of it, it's not bringing attention to it. So I think creating, like they can say, you know, how can I support you? So underrated, asking someone, how can I support you, or what do you need right now? And sometimes it's nothing. And I try and do this in my relationships and stuff, and I think it's quite annoying, but it's like, you know, do you want to talk, or do you want to vent, or do you want advice? Like, what do you need from me right now? How can I help right now? And sometimes it's like, I just want to vent. And it saves you from doing that annoying thing that I definitely do sometimes of like, have you tried this? Have you tried this? It's like, I don't want to try these things. It's fine. I just wanted to vent. And you're like, oh, sorry. Because it is annoying when people try and fix it, right? So maybe they could just ask you, or maybe you could say to them, like, this is what would make me feel like supported, and whatever that looks like. And planning things that, like, don't avoid meals and stuff, but like planning stuff together that is just about being present and joyful, and, you know, being curious, being like, you know, how can we be more mindful in this moment? What have you been doing in your coaching? And how, like, do you want to try any of it together? Because how cool would it be if your friend was like, oh, let's do mindfulness together? Like my little sister, she's really good at all of this stuff, and she, like, I think I've said on the podcast before, at Christmas she'd be like, right, we're all going to do breathing together before dinner, and we'd all just do like some mindful breaths before we had Christmas dinner. And it's like, how nice is that you can incorporate everyone into something like that? So just thinking about, like, can they bring any of your stuff in if you want them to? You might think this is a journey that I want to do on my own, and sometimes with this journey you start off doing it on your own and then realize how important connection is, and authenticity and vulnerability is. And so you then start to bring people more into your space over time, and that might be now, it might be not yet. Okay, George's question. What are the next steps once you feel you've got more of a handle on things? Do you go deeper into your binge eating recovery, or what else is there to discover on this journey? For reference, so this person finds that they struggle with binge eating and has PCOS.
Such a difficult one to answer, because I think like there's so many ways in which this journey can go that I don't think we could even say. And I think that's what I love about doing this sort of work, is all the stuff that kind of, not necessarily all the stuff that shows up, but all the stuff that you find out as well, and all the new things that because you're doing the work on improving your relationship with food, or the new stuff that then brings to life as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with you, Anna. I think I was chatting about this with you yesterday, Emilia. Like, some of my clients, maybe they achieved their initial goal, but this journey is like so ongoing. There's so many different areas that you can continue to explore, like even like body image, there's then like subcategories to that, and like PCOS, there's so many different avenues you could go down with that as well, in terms of like optimizing nutrition. And then even with binge eating disorder recovery, maybe it might even be like hunger and fullness cues, and exploring after that then taste satisfaction. And yeah, it's just like ongoing. It maybe comes back to you, like, what do you feel you need right now, or what do you and maybe also, I think sometimes, depends on a lot of my clients, we don't actually always need to be doing something new. Maybe it's just consolidating everything that we have learned and spending time putting all that into practice. And that doesn't mean that you're not doing anything. That just means, you know, that you're like thriving there. So you are, and just using all those learned experiences.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Anna.
No, I actually had a conversation with a client last week. She's been doing an incredible job, and she was like, do I need to add more? I was like, no, you're doing it. It's great. Things are working. Like, I think we get so caught up on the need to be doing more that we forget that you can actually just sit and enjoy where you're at for a while.
Yeah, from, I suppose, a different perspective, if you're relatively early on in your journey, I'm not sure where you're at, but sometimes when you're recovering from binge eating early on, you actually think that you've solved it, quote unquote, because you've stopped binge eating for 8 weeks. And that's amazing, but often that's a manifestation of the behaviors that you've put in place, and you've got this behavioral regulation. So you're eating regularly, you're giving yourself unconditional permission to eat, you're exercising, you're doing all these behavioral things. And we want to keep these, but there's going to be times in your life when we don't have those behavioral things. So there's so many other forms of regulation that we need to work on. So spiritual regulation, psychological regulation, emotional regulation, other avenues, deeper avenues to go down that are not the behavioral things, which again, they're so important, but they kind of stick a plaster on it. They support the symptom, i.e. the disordered eating, but they don't necessarily tackle the cause. You might tackle some of the cause, the hunger, the restriction, right? But they don't tackle the psychological reasons why you're overeating, or the spirit, like, you know, the disconnection that you feel, etc., etc. So once you've got a quote unquote handle on things, like you said, in terms of the behavioral stuff, it's like, okay, well, let's now start looking a little bit deeper, because at some point things will change. You won't eat regularly, or something will happen in life that triggers you a little bit, and you do find yourself being turned into food again. So then how can we tackle that? What do we need to do to manage those situations? It's me, isn't? No, it's not me. It's Anna.
Is it me? Do you feel like there's a single most effective thing or behavioral tool whilst dieting, i.e. having great sleep hygiene, meditation, mindfulness, solid relationships, stable life, etc.? Also, how many light baby bells does Emilia eat a week?
The limit does not exist on the baby bell. I haven't had any for like a week, you know. I haven't been to the shops since before Level Up.
You okay?
I know. I am struggling. Well, did you see my dinner last night? I've got.
Oh, that was sad time.
It was a sad time, but I really wanted sausages, and I did have like microwave lentils and stuff in the fridge, but I was like, I fancy something different. So it was literally just a bowl of frozen peas and 3 vegetarian sausages. The sad thing is that I ran out of tomato ketchup, so I didn't even have tomato ketchup. It was literally just 3 Linda McCartney.
Oh, that is the saddest dinner.
I know, but I've been really busy this week, and I'm trying to, you know, when you go for phases of like, I want to use up what I've got, and then I'll go to the shops again and start fresh. Which used to be, I kind of thrive on that now. It used to be a time for me when I would find myself like overeating or struggling like with eating in a healthful way, because I wasn't prepared. So I would just eat other stuff. So now I'm like, look at me go, having this healthy. I mean, I was hungry straight after, and then I had a protein bar. But regardless, I forgot the question. I was too busy thinking about my sausages and my peas.
Single most effective thing or behavioural tool whilst dieting? If there is one.
I would say it's a combination. Well, that's not going to be helpful, but I was going to say I don't think there is one single effective thing, because if there was, we wouldn't have so many people struggling with fat loss or struggling with their relationship with food as well. So I think it is always a combination of things together, but that combination might look different for everyone as well, because we've all got different strengths and weaknesses. But yeah, I think I don't think there is one single thing, but I'm keen to hear what you think.
It's just a calorie deficit, babe. That's all it is. That's all it is. No, I totally agree. I was kind of thinking, I think regularity of meals, I think that's hugely impactful. But then I thought, no, because some people like intermittent fasting. I wouldn't recommend intermittent fasting, but some people genuinely do like holding off, or time restriction feeding rather, like to hold off till lunchtime and whatever. Then I thought, maybe sleep, because sleep kind of is the foundation for everything. And I thought, no, because there's loads of like mums of babies that successfully lose fat and like juggle it all. So let's take that off the table. And then, so I agree. There really isn't. I could probably pick like 5 things, but I don't think I could pick one. Oh.
No.
What would you put in your top 5? Sleep,
meal regularity.
Focusing on the process, not the outcome.
Yeah. Quality of making sure you've got taste satisfaction there as well. So like, for example, your dinner last night, Emilia, I think like petit foie quite I loved it, but I couldn't eat that every night of the week either.
Yeah.
And there's like a local person to me started up like a PT page, and she did a post about meal prep, and it was like 5 Tupperwares of like a salad, and it was like iceberg lettuce, sweet corn, red onion, and she's like, and I just add my protein to this in the morning. And I was like, send those people to me, please, because like if you eat that every day for 5 days, okay, you'll be in a calorie deficit, but you're going to end up overeating somewhere because there's no variation or flexibility.
Yeah.
Anna's like, gosh, how many years of my life is that when you do on meal plans?
No, I mean, let's be honest, I wasn't allowed colour, so it'd just be the iceberg like this. So I was...
Oh, good times. I think
yeah.
I think self-compassion, because we all slip up on our diet, and that has a huge impact on whether we can continue or whether we just kind of go off. Mindset.
And some sort of So I was going to say some sort of mindful practice in there somewhere in the top 5, but that could be whatever works best for you. If it's like meditation or yoga or journaling, but one of those practices to give you space during the process.
Let's use the word mindsetfulness to include mindset, mindfulness, because I hate mindset gives me the ick, and we speak about this at Level Up. I really don't like I don't like the phrase mindset, but I don't like the phrase mindset coach particularly. But mindset is important, like coming at it with like, this is a choice, you can stop whenever you want, with a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, with a get to rather than a want to, with a focus on delayed gratification rather than instant gratification, plus all of the mindfulness and self-compassion. So there you go, there's your one top thing. You're so welcome for that. Let's do one more question. Ros, go for
it. Okay. My mum is suffering from extreme anxiety. Her thoughts are old school, and she's a pull yourself together kind of lady. She's eventually, after being unable to get out of the house, seen a doctor and been put in sertraline. She struggles to relax and does not sit down for more than 5 minutes. She tried yoga and hated every second of the mindfulness. Do you have any tips to encourage someone to become mindful for just a couple of minutes? I can't help but feel it would be a benefit to her, but she's very against it. And then there's another question about supplements, but I think
we'll hold off for that one. I think they're combined.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was so basically, I suppose it's people's barriers to practicing mindfulness.
We've spoken about this in relation to ADHD a few times. in that,
Yeah.
or people who struggle maybe with capital T trauma, or just trauma, but like have trauma experience, and mindfulness can feel quite hard, and just sitting can be quite hard. So this is where like active mindfulness comes in, of okay, well, can you have a mindful moment in the woods where you say one thing you smell, see, taste, feel, hear? It's got a 5 there. Or can you mindfully wash the dishes, or mindfully wash your face? I think that's where I would start, or just doing like just 1 minute of breathing, because you forget when you've been doing mindfulness for a while that 1 minute of breathing can feel like a lot. 1 minute of stillness can feel like a lot, but when you've been in it for so long, you feel like, you think, well, 1 minute's easy, like I just blink and it's gone. But for people that haven't practiced it, that feels like a hell of a long time. So I would just really, really strip it back to basics.
I think, was it Steph talked about sensation seeking, and that's maybe the route I'd begin with, because I think, like you said, the idea of not doing for however long feels so overwhelming, particularly when your head's probably going a million miles an hour. Not that any of us can relate in any way, shape or form. So that can be a really nice one. Like when you were saying like washing your face, I was talking to a client, and we were going to do like some sensory work with like hand lotion and a bit of self massage as well, and really focusing on how that feels and the smell of the hand lotion, and just seeing if you can ground yourself and immerse yourself in things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said, because I think so often when people initially think of like yoga or meditation, they think of like a still practice, and I think like we resist stillness, so we do like just naturally. So I think doing something active, and yeah, like let's set it for like 1 minute max, and then once you feel like you're doing 1 minute, you go 2 minutes. I also quite like box breathing sometimes for people, and just counting 3 rounds of box breath, and maybe that might be like even 30 seconds, but you could just do 3 rounds and then build it up to 5 or 6 rounds. And something that I learned as well, just when we talk about trauma, Emilia, if someone is experiencing trauma, closing down your eyes can be more challenging for that person as well, so that you don't always have to have your eyes closed for any of these practices. So that's why like doing the dishes, going for a walk might be better suited to some people than sitting with your eyes closed.
Great point. Okay, fab. Thanks everyone for your great questions. Thank you both so much. Bye.
Thank you.